Acquiring materials and equipment is a key component of advancing research. With acquisitions of property under some government awards, there are certain guidelines that the researcher and the university must abide by. This training module will provide helpful information on acquiring government property, the proper usage, storage, and maintenance of government property, and provide an insight on how government property is tracked at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. There are 3 methods of acquisition concerning government property: procurement through a purchase requisition, government furnished property via transfer document, and donation from the funding agency. When equipment or materials are to be procured through a purchase requisition, it is preferred that the property be identified in the proposal. Doing this secures the necessary approvals ahead of time and expedites the purchase order process later on. When a purchase was not identified during the proposal stage, the requester must obtain prior written approval from the contracting officer of the funding agency before the purchase requisition can be processed. Your contract administrator in the Office of Sponsored Programs can facilitate these actions and assist with obtaining the appropriate approvals. All applicable equipment and material purchases must have a completed tangible property purchase approval form attached. This form helps identify the requester, classifies the item as material or equipment, and identifies title to the property. In addition, it provides a checkpoint to make sure all necessary approvals have been obtained. The form also allows the requester to waive F&A when fabricating a higher assembly by way of approval from the Vice President for Research. At the bottom of the form, there is a reminder for the requester to screen their college or center inventory for reutilization of assets. If property is to be furnished or loaned to the university, the funding agency will provide an appropriate transfer document indicating the transfer. All property transfers must be routed through the Government Property Manager in OSP prior to acceptance. This allows the transaction to be properly vetted and a complete asset record to be established. Since all government-furnished property must be reported annually and at the end of the award, an accurate account is paramount to contract compliance. No researcher or PI is authorized to accept and sign a property transfer. Once the transaction has been approved, the UAH Asset Management Team will assign and affix an appropriate asset tag to the item for identification and tracking. There may be some instances when government property will be donated to the university. This usually occurs at the end of an award through the disposition process, but can also occur at any other time. All donation requests must be routed through the Government Property Manager in OSP to ensure a proper asset record is established. For any donation requests that come from a non-federal agency, the request must be routed through the Office of Advancement. As a reminder, no donation should be accepted without contacting the Office of Sponsored Programs or the Office of Advancement. When the university accepts stewardship of government property, there are guidelines that the university must follow that are dictated by the Federal Acquisition Regulation. These guidelines dictate how we can use the property, when we should declare the property excess, and how the property should be stored. FAR 52.245-1, Section F, Item 8, Paragraph A states that the contractor shall utilize, consume, move, and store government property only as authorized under the contract. This means that any property that holds title with the government can only be used on the tasks for which it was acquired. This is normally outlined in the statement of work for the funded award. It also means that it can only be used during the period of performance for the task on which it was acquired. The property cannot change configuration or be relocated without written consent from the contracting officer of the funding agency. There is no deviation from this guideline without written approval from the contracting officer. Your contract administrator in the Office of Sponsored Programs can assist with these requests. If at any point government property exhausts its intended use, it must be promptly declared excess to contract performance. Since government property can only be used for the task on which it was acquired, once it has exhausted its intended use, the property cannot be used elsewhere without written approval from the contracting officer. Report all excess government property to the Government Property Manager in the Office of Sponsored Programs. All government property must be stored, whenever possible, separately from university property. It is to be visually identified as government property. If separate storage is not available or feasible, then all government property must be plainly and easily identified as government property. Since government-titled property must be reported annually, asset tracking is a mandatory process. Proper tracking encompasses more than an asset tag in the scanner. Proper storage prevents assets from being mistaken for university property and removed. Keeping the government property manager or the UAH asset management team informed about asset status and information changes keeps the fixed asset database up to date. Cooperating with annual physical inventories ensures assets are not lost and proper utilization is being exercised. The university is required to provide adequate identification for all government property. The UAH asset management team affixes asset tags to all government property. These tags say UAH government property, include a barcode, and have an asset number at the bottom. If the asset tag is not outwardly visible during storage, it needs to be separated or otherwise identified as government property. Government property must be stored in a location that provides safety for the asset. The university is a steward of the asset, not the owner. Consideration must be taken for physical safety, but also environmental safety and electrostatic discharge as well. Property custodians are the lifelines throughout the university for the UAH asset management team. Any changes to the status, location, or condition of an asset must be reported to the government property manager without delay. When the information is not updated, the fixed asset database becomes incorrect and could lead to missing property. Missing property affects our ability to utilize government property as well as the university's financial records. Government property undergoes an annual physical inventory conducted by the UAH asset management team. Property custodians are notified of the property on their list, and an arrangement is made to survey the assets. Physical inventories also occur during external and internal audits and will assume the same process. Cooperation by the researcher and property custodian enables these inventories to execute without fault. The researcher, including all PIs and property custodians, is required to abide by all applicable university and federal policies in place for government property and to control, preserve, protect, and maintain any government property in their use. We hope this training module has provided helpful information regarding the acquisition of, usage, and tracking of government property. If there are any questions about government property, please contact your government property manager listed on the next slide.